Good afternoon, everybody. Very tough panel in the sense that we will have to surf amongst cliches, and we'll have to take the highest cliches and then dive into the profundity of some new truths and some new ideas about how to create cultures of creativity. So we'll need your help too. We'll take a lot of questions from the floor, and also you have to self-censor yourselves. Do a little cliche check before you ask the question. No, really, I think it's important. And you can call us on the cliches too, because it's interesting. This is really rife with this kind of danger. But the two persons that are sitting next to me are kind of a safe way to stay away from cliches. They are so not conventional in the way they approach creativity and in the way they approach their work. So to my right and your left is Gary Carter. Gary Carter today is the COO of Fremantle Media. Fremantle Media is the biggest, you always tell me it's one of the two biggest, but I say it's the biggest.
Thanks, Paola.
Production company for reality television. And Gary has been there for a few years, and then before that, he was working with the second best reality TV production company that I won't even name right now, but before that, he trained as a performance artist. And today at Fremantle Media, he's responsible, of course, for all operations, but also for a new division that's called FMX, which is a division that tries to bring, or to integrate, not really to bring, but to integrate television with all sorts of new media, from game consoles to your own portable devices, and tries to find way to keep the live vitality and spectacle of television, even though it's mobile and can be recorded and broadcasted elsewhere. And to my left and your right is John Maeda. You've heard him introduced 1,500 times already here and elsewhere, because he is so ubiquitous in conferences. Why is he ubiquitous? Because he's truly one of the most versatile people that I know. I mean, he's trained as an artist, but truly as a mathematician. Was it last night that you gave the talk? I don't know. I already feel like I've been here 2 weeks. But sometimes in the recent past, he gave a talk in which he showed this beautiful thing of his teacher saying he's good at art and he's good at math. And then his father transmitted that to his friends by saying he's good at math, because he was kind of like a little ashamed of the fact of him being good at art. But in truth, these two, and I will not say poles, these two components of his personality, which we do not consider polarly opposite, have been part of his work for all his life. Today, he's the president of the Rhode Island School of Design, which, as you can imagine, is quite a hefty job. Especially, it's difficult to maintain creativity when you have to deal with a really humongous, mammoth-like case of academia, not kind of academia, case of academia. So I would like to start our talk today by asking you what qualifies you to be part of this talk. Gary, you start. No, absolutely nothing. Go for it.
When Fremantle Media offered me the job as chief operating officer, which hadn't existed before they made me the offer, and I phoned my mother and I said, "Mum, they've offered me this job." There was a slight pause, and then she said, in her particularly helpful way, she said, "And tell me, do they know that you don't know how to do any of those things?" I have no qualifications, but then that's what suits me to be a media executive in the 21st century, I guess. All I know that is that my career has combined working with ideas in various media, whether that's live on stage or whether it's live on television or whether it's live on the web or not live in any of those media. And for me, there is absolutely no disjunction between the operational side of my career or the team leadership side of my career, the financial side of what I do, of my responsibilities, and the creative output that I try to engender inside the corporation, and my own artistic proclivities, except the ones to the left, the artistic proclivities, don't make nearly as much money as the ones to the right, sadly.
But that's a very important point. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's the point for today, but certainly it's extremely important. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so yesterday when we met to discuss this whole panel, you were talking about what it means to inject or to maintain creativity in a $3 billion company. And we would like to know how you go about that. You were talking about also how you hire people. What are the tenets about keeping your soul in a $3 billion company?
My argument through the time that I've been in the company, which is about 8 years now, although only for the last 2.5 as Chief Operating Officer. And unlike most Chief Operating Officers that I know, I'm responsible for the creative output of the company from a central point of view as well. My mission inside the organization has been to convince it that creativity is a necessary output for a television production company. Now, you may think that that is self-evident, but it's not actually self-evident in the sense that the generation of ideas inside a production company often comes from outside. So to give you an example of that, we have a long-standing partnership with Simon Cowell, producing in this country America's Got Talent and in the fall X Factor. The ideas came from his organization, the execution came from ours. My big argument inside the organization has been about convincing ourselves that creativity is necessary and desirable. We do this in a number of ways. I suppose the principal two that I have done is by paying, well, the principal one is to pay attention to people. First of all, we have begun increasingly to hire for attitude rather than for experience, on the basis that experience we can give you, but attitude we cannot create. And so we've tried to isolate those particular characteristics that we believe are necessary to support what we do, which is the transferring of intellectual property. And we try to test for that at various stages throughout the organization, throughout your journey through the organization. Second to that, I have tried to network people across the hierarchy of the organization, because it seems to me that hierarchies are fundamentally uncreative for reasons we can come to, but networks, because they represent clusters of self-interest in the most positive way, are the best ways to engender creative dialogue inside the organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That explains it.
There you go.
John.
Yes.
In your leadership talk, you covered a lot of territory already, but just for how many people were at John's talk? Quite a few, but not enough. So you might want to go back on some of the points that you discussed the other night, or the other morning, whatever it was, in which you really compared the structure of the academia with your desire to instead inject it with the kind of creativity that you knew of.
Well, let's see. I have so many things swimming in my head. I
can imagine.
Saw your talk this morning.
All right, let me help you. Let me help you.
And
clashes, problems. Like, talk about the conflicts that you've had.
Well, and I'm thinking about the conflict of all the things I'm hearing. I saw your innovation talk. This morning was beautiful. Gary, yesterday at lunch, we did a practice session. And I wrote down so many notes from his model of being a leader, because he's an artist, but he's also the COO. Now, how does that happen? And he said the word execution. So somehow, artists are not seen as people that execute, but artists get things done and risk their lives to finish it, you know? So I feel that part. And then David Brooks' talk just now, you walked into the same thing. This idea of being 20-something and having a purpose, knowing what your purpose is. And I'm coming to my end of my second quarter, heading to becoming 50. And I'm asking myself, what is that purpose? So I became a leader by accident. I was meant to be a professor in cold storage at MIT forever, probably, tenured, done, and could have come into work and bought a Starbucks coffee and hung out and went home every day. But I was curious about what else existed out there. And I knew that artists, designers, creative people would somehow be called into action in our country, because if you think about it, technology isn't actually making anything better. You know, like next year there'll be a new microblogging service for 120 characters or 100 characters. Everything keeps getting smaller, simpler, but in reality, the essence doesn't change. It's communication. It's networks of people. But leaders are the ones that define those constraints, the policies around that. So in terms of clashes of culture, you know, I have a 133-year-old institution. And I look at that, and how do you shape change? How do you move to renewal? It's for all them to find inside themselves the artist and designer inside themselves, the one that is risk averse.
Mm-hmm. So those are your enemies, the risk averse people.
The enemies are, from what I learned from David Brooks' talk, the enemy is ourself and how we couch ourselves. And I think that artists and designers carry with themselves a different kind of learned behavior, that if more people could learn it, it'd be fantastic.
What kind of behavior is it? I mean, I'm not going to ask you for a definition of creativity, but sometimes, the word becomes almost devoid of significance, just like innovation. When you hear it too many times, you're like, what does it mean?
Yeah. A good example is, if you look at the innovation agenda in our country, it's focused on STEM education, which is very important: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And if you talk to STEM people, they say, we're creative. Don't tell us we're not creative. And of course they are creative. And they're massively creative in the way that STEM can create innovation expansion. And yet, artists and designers carry a different kind of innovation. It's a bit different. You see it in your own life as a COO. It's like, you didn't see that, did you? Well, I see it. And you can help bring them there. So STEM turning into STEAM is so important. And that's why in Washington we had the STEM to STEAM congressional briefing.
I would like to know how you did it. John, together with a bunch of other people, briefed Congress on the idea of moving from STEM to STEAM. What kind of case studies and ideas did you bring them to convince them?
Well, it was a design problem. It took 3 years. First of all, Rhode Island, it's kind of a small state. And because of that, and because every state gets 2 senators, it's a small state. They'll take my call. So I began talking with them for 3 years. They're like, oh, they take my call. It's weird. If I was in New York or California, impossible. But and that built in a relationship. And they felt that our country needed some kind of leadership in innovation around STEM, which is going to define our next economy. It was like that Schoolhouse Rock thing. I'm just a bill sitting here on Capitol Hill, and just moving it gently there. It was a slow process, but we got there. It was very exciting.
But when you were there, what did you tell them?
What happened is that it wasn't me, actually. It was actually other people came and testified. There was Adam Bly from Seed Magazine who talked about how scientists use science is influenced by art all the time and how to expand that.
He said design.
He actually expanded it to art and design. He was saying, my friend Paola said just to say design, but I'm going to broadly say art and design. We also had someone from the National Academy of Sciences who's releasing a new white paper on education and science, and preaching about how education and science is looking for this extra creative factor, specifically in visualization. And we also had a person from our adult education division talking about how Americans live a long time now, and how do you leverage that part of their lives to serve this goal of taking their science knowledge and adding art to it.
And what do you expect the members of Congress that were there to take away, and what do you think they'll do with it?
Oh, well, we thought the room would be empty, actually, because it's like, art, like people are going to come, and reps from different states came. They were all there, and they were just curious about, what is this? And it was in the good room, because there are bad conference rooms there. It was in the good room. But it was the first step, and there was such pride in people that were doing this.
So it's about their curiosity, and curiosity is something that I wanted to discuss. Yesterday when we were discussing, you talked about the fact that when you look for the right attitude in people to hire them at Fremantle Media, you look for the 4 C's. You have your own schemes. I wrote them down. You look for somebody who's collaborative, confident, creative, and commercial. So I find really interesting the fact that you had also the commercial at the it was in the middle, but I put it at the end because I wanted to have a good closing. But in truth, for creative people, cliche but reality, ideas sometimes are $1 a pound. It's how to make them happen that really defines your strength and your efficacy in the world.
I spent much of my career thinking that finance was something that other people dealt with because I was an artist or a creative, and the money was something that I shouldn't come near. And a couple of years ago, I woke up to the enormous naivety of that position, particularly as my career took me into leadership positions, and that creativity and finance are inextricably bound because money represents one of the boundaries of the tennis court on which you're playing the game. And without those boundaries being very clear to all players, you can't actually get on with the game, so you can't make something. One of the things that I fight against in television, and I fight against in my own company, is the lack of transparency about money. Because because I don't know how many of you make television, but television's made on multiple budgets. So this is how it goes. So I'm the head of the company. I'm going to sell you, nice person over there at the broadcaster, a program, and we're going to agree on how much money it is. Yes, it's going to be $100, and then I'm going to go to my producer or my production manager. I'm going to say, look, we only got $95 from the broadcaster. Okay, can you do the budget? And then you do the budget, and you go to the producer because you're going to control the budget, and you say, bad news, we've only got $80. And so it goes on, and yet all of us know that this is happening, yes? That there's a budget that you talk to the client about, and a budget that you talk to yourself about, and the one that you show yourself on a Tuesday, and the one that you only show to your shareholder, and da-da-da-da. And at the end, the people who are making the product, and that ultimately includes the whole company, have no actual idea of what the implications are of what they're doing from a creative point of view. And I think that's a fundamental problem. Now, I understand, because I have arguments with my boss and the finance director all the time, that there are questions about financial transparency, that there are issues around financial transparency. On the other hand, if you can't trust the people that you work with, why are you employing them to begin with, he said naively. So I'm all for financial clarity. I'm a born-again finance person.
Mm-hmm. And this is a very design-like attitude, because in truth, the idea of the real world, whether it's represented by money or by the body of a person that's going to be harmed by the fact that you might make a knife blade chair, this reality check is something that is truly important for designer and for artists, for all creative people. I think that in just 20 minutes, we've already debunked a few of the cliches about creativity. We've talked about the fact that it's important to make it live in the real world and to convince politicians and policymakers, and that it relates to a reality check that is financial and also practical. So we are moving away from the pottery making and from the watercolor in front of the river. And we can move away even more by talking about a point that you just hinted at the beginning, which is the idea of generalism, the idea that you were the perfect person for the job because you didn't really know how to do it. So is being a generalist an important ingredient of creativity as opposed to specialization or not? What do you think?
That's a very tricky one. I think that if generalization, if being a generalist points to a degree of intellectual and emotional curiosity
Yes.
about the world, then I absolutely think it's an important thing. On the other hand, creativity also requires a sense of skill, and from a motivational point of view, a sense that your technique, your expression of ability is being refined with additional challenges. So if it's not too much of a fence sit, I would say you need to be a specialist and a generalist at the same time.
At the same time, no, it's okay, absolutely. What do you think, John?
I think that I'm fascinated by the curation profession, as you know. I think curators are massive generalists, but experts at doing that. They're able to see different points you wouldn't expect. I see Barbara Blomick over there. I remember when she put Google into the Cooper Hewitt National Design Triennial. People were like, why is Google in there? That was before Google was hot. But it was a kind of design. So somehow curators can see what's in the world and find the connections, so they're ultra generalists. And I used to always feel bad about being a generalist. I think in my mid-20s, I went from field to field, like ever saw the Kung Fu, that TV series, from one town to new town, every town. I did device physics, I did like graphic design, I did computer programming. It was kind of like I was lost, but I was learning a lot. And I had this great sculptor, Igarashi Takanobu, a common friend. Mm-hmm. He's very mystic and magical. And I was at his office, and I said, people tell me, I should stop doing this and just study one thing, become a specialist. And I don't know what to do. So he says, well, John, you should think of your life differently. There's an Eastern way of thinking and a Western way of thinking. Think of it as you're building your life. You're building a kind of a mountain or hill. And in the Western model, you're trying to go faster, so to be more specialist, he said, and your mountain grows higher. In the Eastern way, you're more of a generalist, going across things, and your mountain is kind of like a hill. And he said, if you do it over tens of years, what happens is this mountain becomes this structure like this if you're a generalist. It's a big mountain, a heap, like Mount Fuji, the symbol of beauty, immovable. Whereas in this way, he says, John, if you keep going up the mountain, it's really tall. If something is wrong along the way, it all falls over. So I always like that frame.
It is pretty powerful. But not all curators are generalists. I mean, if you talk to John Elderfield, he knows the shoe size of Matisse, Picasso. I mean, it's really like,
I forgot.
and they might be generalists outside.
I mean, to know
Yeah,
Matisse's shoe size is a certain
absolutely.
generalization, isn't it?
Yeah, you think so? Yes, maybe. Maybe he knows more than one pair of shoes. No, I'm always amazed by people that really dive deep and that are able, because it's a different frame of mind. But I like the fact of being generalist and specialist at the same time. And definitely curiosity is one of the most powerful engines for all sorts of human endeavor. Now, is creativity really in opposition to other forms of thought, and what are they anyway? I was thinking about it because once again I was going back to that William Burroughs quote, which says that science tries to understand the universe and art tries to enjoy it, which I find really wrong. So does it still make any sense to position creativity in opposition with something else?
I don't think it makes any sense, but sadly I think it happens all the time. Certainly working in a creative industry, it's amazing how much prejudice there is against people who are perceived to be uncreative inside that organization. So historically, inside Fremantle Media, there's a lot of prejudice about suits and non-suits. I tried to do my little bit by always wearing suits when I'm in the office, just to confuse people. But seriously, I mean, they never see me like this, for example. But I think that really what we're talking about is not so much. I think it's a naive generalization because creativity is something that can be found in any field, in any area, in all kinds of places. And one of the things that happens is we are very blinkered about acknowledging the creativity of people outside our own domain. So television producers are big at seeing the creativity of other television producers, but they can't understand perhaps that these spectacles also represent the creativity of somebody else. That's what I think. So I think that understanding that creativity is very, very close to what it means to be human, I think, is important in understanding how you lead people and how you shape organizations. And one of the problems with the suits versus non-suits divide is that actually what you're talking about is a genuine polarization between predictive, controlling, risk-averse functions inside a corporation and those that are not. And if you don't manage to make the entire organization both positive and negative in polar terms, all that happens is people collect around those poles and the organization starts to stretch faster and faster and faster. So to bring all functions to an understanding that they have a creative viewpoint within their own domains, and then that they're contributing to the creative output of other people, seems to me part of the clue to creating a genuinely creative culture. Prejudice is not creative.
No, prejudice is the opposite of creativity, in the sense that it's about paralysis. I know I asked you yesterday, and you told me not to ask you, and I'm asking you now.
Oh, Lord.
Do you have any good examples of entities, I'm not saying corporations, entities that you admire where this integration actually happened, even if it lasted for 2 months? I would like to give this audience some ideas of companies. Or
I do have one. You won't have heard of them, but you should look them up on the web. So there's a small Dutch organization called Freedom Lab, which is a scenario planning organization.
Yeah, I know who they are. They're great. Yeah, it's true.
And they're led by somebody who's one of my closest friends, and he is completely unlike any other person I've ever met. So to say he's idiosyncratic doesn't go half of the way. But his organization changes its fundamental structure every couple of years. I mean, he burns it down, almost literally. He burns it down and remakes it. And when he employs people, he promises them when they come in that there is a point when it will be burnt down during the time of their involvement with the company, so that they can prepare. One of the ironies is, of course, they're never prepared and they're always surprised when it finally happens. Like they didn't, when he said in 3 years' time, by the way, I'm shutting it down, we're all going to terminate our contracts, we're going to start again. And then when it happens, they all go, but you're closing it down. And he goes, that's what I said in the contract when I employed you. And they are truly creative because they're ultimately multidisciplinarian. They are driven solely by curiosity about the world. in fact, they are only good scenario planners because they have this enormously wide-ranging, autodidactic view of the world. So they are constantly creating models of the world that are fundamentally different from anybody else's because they are constantly talking to experts in their fields like yourself or to John in order to, from widely differing points of view, build models for the future of particular companies.
That's really good. And, you know, they're basically building the precipice that on whose edge they're dancing all the time, which is quite great. You were saying that artists risk their lives. So, And you, John, do you have any examples?
No, making me think. I mean, everyone is creative, and I think that we have a lot of incremental creativity.
That's a big statement.
Which is
So
valid.
interesting.
The accountants, sometimes bad creativity there. But lawyers, any profession, you know, there is creativity, but it's usually incremental creativity. If you look at Europe, as it evolved, creativity became incremental, and the great experiment of America was a whole chance to reboot from scratch. The DNA got all messed up. It got all mixed up. And I think America had that edge because it was so messed up. It was a primordial soup reforming its idea of what is creative, what is new, what is possible in the economy. However, those values in America, going back to David Brooks' talk, I wonder, like, where is the values of arts rooted in our country? It goes back to education. And if you look at education in America, and more, art is very irrelevant. It's not measurable. It's not precise. It's not important. That's why art is not testable either. So it's off the importance meter in our country. And so for me, I would say the bigger problem is, like, isn't who is creative, but are we removing creativity from our values in the country? People who will say, I'm not creative, I hate art, I hate creativity, if they have kids, they will all say the same thing.
But you're not going to find one American that says that. It's the only place where you can put artist as a profession on the passport.
Oh, okay.
Let's
take it, but there are people who are always like, you know, I'm anti-art. I'm anti-art, I don't believe in museums, etc. But those who have kids will always soften when they say, well, you know, how old is your child? And 4. Does he or she draw pictures? Oh yes, I just love getting his pictures. Well, that's art. And somehow then the frame softens and changes. It goes back to the whole emotion frame because art can deliver that value in the emotional axis.
Do you believe that people that have gone to a Montessori school are really different in the way they live their lives? Do you think that kind of hyperdrive art education?
No, I think the ones that went to a Waldorf school are.
Oh yeah, the Waldorf.
Because, yeah, I think that the importance of education in relation to building creative cultures is that the problem, it's like the Mozart problem. If Mozart didn't find his way to a keyboard instrument, what would he have written? Or if he didn't find his way to music, what would have happened? If you don't open up possibilities for young people at a very early age and give them a very, very enormous generalized landscape to play in, how will they find their way to the expression of their true talent? That seems to me the central dilemma. My education, which was South African, very, you know, apartheid regime, 60s and 70s, very streamed according to ability, terrible, terrible decisions about, well, sorry, you get to 13 and you have to choose between maths and history. What?
Sorry.
Oh, and by the way, this school doesn't have any art in it at all, so you can't. You'll have to do biology.
So
and
where did you study art in the end?
where did I study art? I had to wait till I got to drama school before I did. I think that's a fundamentally short-sighted way of building a society in the future. Education, in my view, for as long as possible, should be humanist and as wide-ranging and as generalist as possible.
Yeah, that's another. We're opening gigantic pots here, so I hope you'll continue these conversations afterwards. I would like to touch upon another aspect of creativity before we open up the panel to the floor for questions, which is the space, the architecture of creativity. does there need to be a certain configuration to the space for creativity to happen? I remember at the end of the 20th century, this whole idea that you had to do away with cubicles and everybody had to come together, and the famous or infamous Chaya Day offices in New York City, they were designed by Gaetano Pesce. They were like really visionary but totally overwhelming. It's like when they tell you that a dress is wearing you as opposed to you wearing the dress. It was the same situation. So is it true it needs to be a city? Is it true that it needs to be an office with a lot of meeting space? Are there spaces that are designed for creativity?
I think there are fundamentally uncreative spaces. Mm-hmm. I think that working in an environment which hinders the contact between people on a personal level is dangerous. I think that ones which prevent, or environments which prevent one having access to the outside, whatever that outside may be, whether it's metaphorical or literal, is very dangerous for creativity. And I think that ones that are ill-equipped in terms of the tools that you need, or the building blocks that you need, are fundamentally dangerous. For the rest, I think you can get on with it pretty much anywhere.
Mm-hmm. John?
I don't believe that particular spaces can make you more creative. I think if you think of the space you're living in, the two spaces that are most important are your parents and how they raised you, your family, how they support you, and also policy. Policy is the big house we're living in.
Policy. So why do you think New York is considered, and frankly is, more creative than, say, I don't want to put the comparison, Milan, I'll bring it home. So, and then another place. What makes New York in terms of creativity?
That came in the question to you in the earlier. There someone asked about Italy, and you can also argue that Tokyo or any modern whatever super capital is creative. I think it's just the people, because the people are interesting. The people make things. You're saying this yourself. I love HR. It's my favorite thing, actually, as a leader. HR is like everything, the people. Because HR is where all the creativity can happen. The people make the place creative, not the fancy couch.
And you were saying how you insist on people meeting each other.
Yeah. When I began a program several years ago inside Fremantle of people meeting each other and spending time with each other in relatively unfocused situations, often with outside stimulation, but not necessarily with a primary cause. And at the time, the board was very grumpy about this. They told me that meeting one another was not a business activity. That same person also told me that they didn't think it was important that the people who worked in a company knew what the company's strategy was. Perhaps these two things go hand in hand. But it seemed to me that unless I know who Paola is and that she works in the New York office, and unless we know each other well enough for me to know what her specialization is, and to know that she will open my email when she sees my name on it, and that she will answer the phone when I phone and say I have a problem. If I can't do those things, and that requires a lot of human-to-human interface, I fundamentally the organization will struggle to be creative.
Well, we've been dealing with money, policy, architecture. Two great examples of creativity in practice came up with Freedom Lab and America. So I think we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, not bad, huh?
The Freedom Lab people would love that. Yeah.
That was pretty great, John, I have to say. And now we would like to open up to you for questions. So we're going to start here. This is Mike. Well, no, Mike is coming. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Catherine Gleason. And as we discussed this afternoon, and this could be to any or all of you, cultures that foster creativity. One area of our culture that hasn't been mentioned is our healthcare community. We are finding, for example, that neuroscientists are increasing their sense of value for creativity in the aging process, with memory, with general well-being, and there are some in the scientific community that actually believe creativity will be our next antioxidant. And I was wondering whether you could speak to that role of creativity for well-being.
Nice question. Go ahead.
I'm so excited. We just had a symposium on RISD campus backed by the Robert Johnson Foundation. It was on arts and wellness. And we had Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary come, and also the CDC came as well. And the outcome, the output was Health and Human Services asked for 6 interns to work in Washington on some of their work. So that's a nice example of how they're looking for the antibody. The antibody is in fresh young talent in America, and we can inject it into our country, into the bloodstream.
Instead, to give a little publicity to MoMA, we have an amazing art therapy program for Alzheimer patients, which is just stunning. Now to you.
I'm no expert. I certainly know nothing about American healthcare systems. What I do believe, as I said earlier, is that creative expression is very much at the core of what it means to be human. One of the difficulties is often people don't find their way to the mode of expression that will allow them to achieve that kind of expressiveness. I know from my own experience of my own life that the way I see the world and the things that I make of what I see of the world and feel of the world are absolutely intrinsic to my well-being in all aspects. So I can only imagine that a cause of lifelong learning and lifelong expression and of lifelong and of learning and expression across all physical and mental abilities at whatever stage of your life must be very, very sustaining, apart from being fundamentally enriching for society as a whole.
Thank you. Who wants to ask another question? I can't believe, did I scare you? Okay, I scared you with the cliche check. Don't do that. Cliches galore. Yeah.
Tremo, I really appreciated your comments, excuse me, at the Big Ideas session that we have. Following up on this question, and very much related to what both of you spoke about at the start of this, there's a creativity in the arts.
Say what you do, because it's interesting.
I'm a professor at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA and the Herb Alpert School of Music at UCLA.
Yeah.
I work a little bit as a songwriter now with Universal Music. Most of my time as a physician and a neurologist. And I'm very much involved with neuroscience, the arts, and medicine through a nonprofit that I founded. A problem that we have with creativity has a lot to do with what you talked about, Gary, with the boundaries. There's those young people out there who want to be creative and write music and make songs. They're worried about making a living too. So there's this question of if only 1 out of every 10,000 pop songwriters or performers is actually going to get a recording contract. How is that going to work? That's one side of the question. The other side of it is I'd like to know from all 3 of you, is the experience of being Guns N' Roses in a cardboard box in Los Angeles, or being the Beatles 4 in one room next to the ladies' latrine in Hamburg, or Stephanie Germanato living in Roaches in New York City, is that part of the formula for creativity? Does creativity spring from that intense struggle as the individual artist? And just parenthetically, the DHHS is funding grants, like grants I've gotten from the NIH for many years, at a rate of 6% in the category of complementary medicine. So we're experiencing in neuroscience and medicine a huge funding cut, where these creative ideas where we want to bring the arts to the dementias, or we want to bring the arts to sensory enrichment for premature infants. Where's the money coming from? How are we going to do it?
Right,
Who's our Gary Carter?
There are so many pieces to this question. Let me
Can I have
regroup,
a
but
crack
this was really great. Have a crack
number
at the
2
first.
and number 1. No, I'm going to do
You
both.
want number 1 too? Because
2
Holland.
and number 1
Okay.
first.
You decide.
First of all, as somebody who trained as an actor, I think that when I observed my own training, which was very good from a skill point of view and from a technical point of view, it did not address questions of the commercial viability of the path that I was going on, how to manage that, what the implications were, how to deal, none of it. It focused solely on what it meant to be a performer. And then it went one step further and one step worse, is it taught me that my vocation should prepare me for lifelong penury. And that as an artist, what I should do is I should be prepared to die in the gutter for my art. And fundamentally, as I've got older, I've come to believe that that is an institutional myth that prepares one for the position of arts in a capitalist society. I think it's rubbish. Looking at my own artistic output, which goodness knows none of you will have heard of, as my financial status has changed over the years, my art is no worse for that. In fact, it's better for that because the money has given me access to a whole lot of other things that I would not have had access to if I was starving in a garret in Cape Town. So, personally, I think that's a pile of hooey. The second thing is, to go to your first question, I don't think the issue is the one songwriter who can make it out of 100,000. I think the issue is understanding that although you may not be able to make your living as an artist, that does not invalidate artistic practice on an individual level. And although there is something to be said about the way that society defines whether you've made a contribution creatively, I still think it's possible to be a very fine practitioner and to be ultimately unknown. And goodness knows, living in Amsterdam, around the corner I have the example of Vincent himself to justify that, although I don't want to get into mental illness and art.
John?
That's a great set of questions. First of all, artists and designers are typecast as people that have to struggle, even designers too, who are the pure ones, the ones that don't sell out, the ones that don't do things for companies and things like that, but how do you make a living? And that myth is propagated in education by many teachers who say you should do this, but they have a teaching job, so they can say that. Education is a wonderful womb in which these minds can gestate, so I'm not so against that kind of womb. It creates that kind of safe space to take risks, to make leaps. But once you leave that womb, what do? It's why one of my focuses is careers after art and design in all kinds of fields. Because I meet so many samples of alumni as president, I have to tell you, I have famous artists, famous designers. I have famous lawyers, famous doctors, famous scientists. It's very strange, but I can see the link between that, and it can help to sort of renorm that inside my own school and the outside. And your question about, what was it? What was the other question? He said he had two parts.
The other one was, is it true
funding.
that they have to struggle?
Funding, and how funding works. I think that nationally, our policy around anything creative, high risk, is high risk, which means someone's job or someone's position, and the administration changes, and so we don't want that. How do you reduce the risk? There is strength in numbers. In Japan, there's a famous comedian, actor, director, Beat Takeshi. He used to say this thing when he was a comedian. He would say on Japanese national television, in Japanese, he would say, if the light is red, even if we all cross at the same time, it'll be okay. And this made havoc on Japanese television. But the reason why I bring this up, in Japan of all places, we don't do that, But in our country, I see how more and more policymakers are looking for a good excuse to inject creativity in there somewhere. And we've seen in this whole STEM to STEAM work, or with the art and wellness stuff with Rebel Johnson Foundation, people are like, is it okay to do some of this? So how do you find the validation points is the key to actually wrestle away some of that percentage point?
Thank you. So hold on, okay. Nia, because she was here before everybody else. And then I'm going to go to Barbara, and then I think, well, let's see how we're doing.
Good afternoon. My name again is Nia Meeks. I'm from Philadelphia. We are talking about young people and really engaging young people with creativity, particularly looking at the next generation. I recall Sir Ken Robinson speaking about how creativity, it's pretty much stamped out of children. You test them in pre-kindergarten, they have creativity, it's off the charts. By the time they graduate from high school, they have none. A lot of that happens in the classroom. And I'm curious whether it's through RISD or even through some of the work that you have, how then can we impact classroom teachers, whether that's in the stages of training teachers to take more art classes, or something that's a fundamental but practical thing that you can do, whether it's a science teacher or what have you, because I've engaged in teaching English and having young people draw murals as part of a book that they were reading or what have you. However, that was unusual. That wasn't the norm. How can we norm these kinds of unusual components with art?
I thought Paola nailed it in her speech this morning about how an exhibition at MoMA validates a creative talent. It's like I saw being in Paola's show is like getting a commencement certificate. That, I'm valid now. Going to the art teachers, though, teachers in general are not validated. A good example, at the congressional briefing, an alumni came to this event, and I met him at a DOT presentation I gave. I met him, I talked about his work, he talked about his work. I posted on our blog about this amazing teacher of art. So he came to this last week, and he said, I came here specifically because you did something very important for me. I said, what was that? You posted about my thinking about being an art teacher in our country. And that 10-second conversation validated 10 years of my being an art teacher, not just for me, he said, in a very humble way, for all art teachers. So how do we change that norm, I think, is a big challenge in our country.
Thank you.
I'm married to an educationalist who specializes in working with very, very young children with profound and multiple physical and mental difficulties. If I may channel him for a moment, just because it's more interesting than what I might have to say, he would say, in his view, the training of teachers is focused on process and methodology and not on end result. So they are not taught to clarify the kinds of individuals they wish to help shape from a leadership point of view. And so it's all about the now and what I do and how I do it, and not enough about the kinds of qualities that we agree are necessary to help that individual reach their full potential, if that is helpful.
Can I add that?
Sure.
There's two parts around that also, though. There's the policies by the government around education and requirements thereof. And it's also the classroom as a real place where kids haven't eaten because maybe their parents are working or they're taking care of their younger sibling. So like the classroom is not a perfect place to open your mind and receive the message. So family situation and policies on education.
Thank you.
As I'm struggling here. John, the idea that art students would then go on to become lawyers and doctors makes a whole lot of sense. But I want to ask a question in this design art area. David Kelly, who was speaking this morning about the design school that's set up at Stanford, said that his classes inevitably have engineering students, law students, medical students, literature students in the design classes as undergraduates or graduate students. What is it that he's done with design that manages to make it something valid for an engineer to take a class in that we can't seem to be able to do with the visual arts or music?
He's leveraging the brand of Stanford and the resources in it. It's an extraordinary opportunity. It's something that David waited for years to do that. He's the one who said to me, John, when you're over 50, people will listen to you. And he has that chance, and it's exciting. It's a very rare occurrence.
I have no contribution.
Okay, we have time for one last one, if there's anybody. Yeah, over there. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for doing this. What I'm interested in is when you're in a work environment and creativity is at the core,